Hello and welcome to your Microbiology Bio 203 lecture on diseases of the skin and eyes. I'm Mr. Kennedy and I'll be guiding you through this material and sharing this information with you. The first thing I'd like to do is to share with you the basic architecture of skin. If this is the first time you've been exposed to the anatomy or basic architecture of skin, I would recommend doing a little outside research to improve your familiarity with the skin and its accessory structures, which will help significantly as we go through the pathology associated with skin. For now, I'll divide skin up into three basic components: the epidermis, the keratin, and the dermis. The epidermis is a thin outer portion of skin composed of layers of epithelial cells. Keratin is the waterproofing protein coating outer layer of the epidermis. And finally, the dermis. This is the inner thick portion of skin composed mainly of connective tissue. In this slide, you can see the basic anatomy of a piece of skin and its accessory organs. Aside from the physical structure of skin, we also need to consider the chemical nature of skin. The chemical nature of skin is one such that it might promote bacterial growth as well as inhibit it. Perspiration provides moisture and nutrients that can promote microbial growth, but of only specific species that we will later explore under the umbrella of the term normal microbiota. For any other organism, the salt in perspiration actually inhibits their growth. Perspiration can also contain lysozymes and antimicrobial peptides. Sebum is secreted by oil glands and it contains fatty acids that inhibit pathogens. Our skin has some necessary openings. Those openings to our body cavities are lined with mucous membranes. Mucous membranes are tightly packed epithelial cells attached to an extracellular matrix. Mucous membranes secrete mucus, and some of the cells in mucous membranes have cilia. The ciliated cells move the mucus in a direction such that anything embedded in the mucus, pathogenic or otherwise, can be dealt with appropriately. Mucus is often acidic, and mucous membranes are often highly folded to maximize their surface areas. Next thing we'll look at is the normal microbiota of your skin. The normal microbiota are bacteria, microorganisms that we expect and maybe even encourage to grow in and on your skin. The normal microbiota are a necessary step in protecting us from pathogenic species. Normal microbiota occupy niches that pathogenic organisms could easily take advantage of if they weren't there. In order to live long-term on skin, you must be resistant to drying and high salt concentrations. Some examples of normal microbiota include staphylococci and micrococci. As a rule, areas that are warm, dark, and moist tend to support more microbial growth than those that are not. There are gram-positive pleomorphic rods that also live in our skin. Propionibacterium acne inhabit hair follicles and are anaerobic. They help maintain our skin's pH. Corynebacterium xerosis occupies our skin's surface, and Malassezia furfur can even produce dandruff. It's a yeast. At this point, we'll move on to looking at microbial diseases of the skin. And as we do so, the first thing we have to do is deal with a number of terms that describe in lay terminology what we consider to be bumps on the skin. Vesicles are small fluid-filled lesions. Bulla are vesicles larger than 1 centimeter. Macules are flat reddened lesions. Papules are raised lesions. Pustules are raised lesions with pus. Xanthem is a rash arising from a disease, and anthem is a rash on a mucous membrane arising from a disease. In this slide, you can see that there are literal measurements that distinguish each of these one from the next. At this point, we'll begin exploring different microbes that specifically inhabit your skin in both positive and negative ways, starting with staphylococci. Staphylococci are spherical gram-positive bacteria that form irregular clusters. Many produce coagulase, an enzyme that clots fibrin in the blood. On this slide, you can see a negative and a positive result of coagulation. Staphylococcus epi, or Staphylococcus epidermis, makes up 90% of our normal skin microbiota. But even something that is normal and encouraged to grow in our skin can become a problem if it enters areas of the body where it does not belong. It is a healthcare-associated pathogen. It can produce biofilms on catheters and is coagulase negative. Staphylococcus aureus is carried in the nasal passages of 20% of the population. Its golden yellow colonies are coagulase positive. It can produce damaging toxins and cause sepsis. It has an interesting way of avoiding host defenses in the skin by secreting proteins and toxins that can kill phagocytic cells. MRSA is an excellent example of a staphylococcal skin infection caused by Staphylococcus aureus. Next, some more terms to describe some skin infections: folliculitis, stye, furuncle, carbuncle, and impetigo. Folliculitis is infections of the hair follicle. Stye is folliculitis of an eyelash. Furuncle, a boil, is a type of abscess. It's localized region of pus surrounded by inflamed tissue. Carbuncle is damaged and inflammation of deep tissue from a spreading furuncle. And impetigo is crusting sores spread by auto-inoculation. This is an example of impetigo. The next skin infection for us to consider, also a staphylococcal skin infection, is scalded skin syndrome. Scalded skin syndrome is a form of bullous impetigo caused by the production of toxin B, which causes exfoliation. Toxic shock syndrome is also a staphylococcal infection. Toxic shock syndrome can produce fever, vomiting, shock, and organ failure. This is an example of scalded skin syndrome. Streptococcal skin infections. Streptococcal skin infections are produced by gram-positive cocci in chains. They can produce hemolysins that lyse our red blood cells. Beta-hemolytic streptococci often cause diseases. Streptococci can differentiate into groups A through T based on antigenic cell wall carbohydrates. Group A streptococci, or GAS, also known as Streptococcus pyogenes, has 80 immunological types. They produce virulence through streptolysins, which lyse red blood cells, and proteins, which are external to the cell wall that allow adherence and immune system avoidance. Hyaluronidase, which dissolves connective tissue, and streptokinases, which dissolve blood clots. Streptococcal skin infections also include erysipelas. Streptococcus pyogenes infects the dermal layers of the skin and can cause local tissue destruction and sepsis. Another serious streptococcal skin infection is necrotizing fasciitis. This is a flesh-eating disease. The streptococcal organism that causes necrotizing fasciitis produces exotoxin A. Exotoxin A, produced by Streptococcus pyogenes, acts as a super antigen. Streptococcal organisms can also cause toxic shock syndrome, similar to staphylococcal toxic shock syndrome. This is an example of the damage caused by group A beta-hemolytic streptococcal toxins. Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Pseudomonas are gram-negative aerobic rods. Pyocyanin produces a blue-green pus. Pseudomonas produce exo and endotoxins and can grow in biofilms. Pseudomonas dermatitis is a self-limiting rash acquired in swimming pools. Pseudomonans are also responsible for swimmer's ear, otis externa. Pseudomonans are opportunistic in burn patients and anywhere else they can find in the body. Many pseudomonans are also resistant to antibiotics. Burglar eye ulcer is caused by Mycobacterium ulcerans. It produces the toxin mycolactone, and it enters via a break in the skin or an insect bite. It causes deep damaging ulcers which may require amputation. It exceeds the incidences of leprosy and is found primarily in Western and Central Africa. One of the more common skin diseases that many of us have experienced in our own lifetimes is acne. It's the most common skin disease in humans. The skin cells shed in their hair follicles and combine with sebum, causing blockages. Sebum formation is affected by hormones, not diet. Comedoral acne is easily treated with topical formations. Inflammatory or moderate acne caused by Propionibacteria acne can metabolize sebum, fatty acids, and produce an inflammatory response. This needs to be treated with antibiotics and benzoyl peroxide. Nodular or cystic severe acne is noted by inflamed lesions with pus deep in the skin. These are some pictures of acne. Viral diseases of the skin. Many viral diseases are transmitted via respiratory routes and are systemic. Many cause problems in children and developing fetuses. Warts are an example of a viral disease of the skin. Warts are caused by papillomavirus. Papillomas are small skin growths transmitted via contact. There are more than 50 types of papillomavirus. Some cause skin and others cause cervical cancers. They can be treated with cryotherapy, electrodissection, or salicylic acid. Smallpox, or variola, is caused by orthopoxvirus. There are two forms of the disease. Variola major has a 20% mortality, and variola minor, which has less than 1%. They are transmitted via the respiratory route, and they move into the bloodstream and infect the skin. They have been completely eradicated from human populations by vaccination, or so we thought. Smallpox is still around in small quantities as a result of people groups in other countries, and even this one, not being vaccinated against smallpox. Smallpox is a potential bioterrorism weapon. We maintain cultures of smallpox in places like the CDC so that we are able to generate vaccines when needed. Monkeypox. Monkeypox is related to smallpox. It's endemic in small animals in Africa and jumps from animals to humans, has a mortality of 1 to 10%, and it can be prevented by smallpox vaccination. This is what smallpox lesions look like on an individual. Similar in nature to smallpox is chickenpox, caused by varicella. Chickenpox is a herpes virus, varicella zoster, which causes bumps or pus-filled vesicles to form on the skin. It is transmitted via the respiratory route. Reye's syndrome is severe complications of chickenpox, which include vomiting and brain dysfunction. Aspirin use increases the risk of Reye's syndrome. The varicella zoster virus can become latent in the central nerve ganglia and stay hidden in a person for decades. Prevention by live attenuated vaccine is the best way to control the spread of chickenpox. This is an example of what chickenpox looks like on a patient. Shingles, herpes zoster, is the reactivation of the latent varicella zoster virus that moves along the peripheral nerves of the skin. Shingles can appear days, months, years, or even decades after a person was exposed to chickenpox. Oftentimes, it appears as a result of stress. Stress tends to lower an individual's immunity and allows the virus to become active. Shingles follows the distribution of affected cutaneous sensory nerves and is usually limited to one side of the body. Best way to avoid shingles is through the varicella-zoster vaccine. Antiviral drugs may also lessen the symptoms of shingles. This is what shingles looks like. Herpes simplex. Herpes simplex 1 and 2. Herpes simplex 1 is spread primarily by oral or respiratory routes. Herpes 2 is spread primarily sexually. 90% of the population is infected with some form of herpes virus. Usually, when infected with the herpes virus, what we see outwardly as form of symptoms are cold sores or fever blisters. Herpes virus is not the cause of canker sores. This is what cold sores or fever blisters look like. Herpes virus, herpes simplex 1, can remain latent in the trigeminal nerve ganglia. Outbreaks are triggered by the sun, stress, or hormonal changes. Herpes virus 2 can remain latent in the sacral nerve ganglia near the spine. Herpes gladiatorium is diagnosed by vesicles on the skin. Herpetic whitlow are vesicles on the fingers, and herpes encephalitis occurs when viruses spread to the brain. This can be treated with acyclovir. Measles. Measles is a viral disease transmitted by respiratory route, has cold-like symptoms, and creates a macular rash. Koplik spots are red spots on the oral mucosa opposite the molars. Measles can cause encephalitis in 1 in 1,000 cases. Measles can lead to subacute sclerosing panencephalitis, which is rare. It occurs 1 to 10 years after measles recovery. Measles can be prevented by the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella. Children under the age of 1 cannot receive the vaccine. This is what a patient might look like with a rash of small raised spots typical of measles, rubella. Rubella is German measles. Rubella viruses cause the German measles, and they'll give you a macular rash and light fever. German measles are transmitted via the respiratory route and have a 2 to 3 week incubation period. The rubella virus can also cause congenital rubella syndrome, which is fetal damage, deafness, heart defects, and mental retardation as a result of exposure to the virus. 15% mortality occurs from congenital rubella syndrome. This too can be prevented by the MMR vaccine. However, the MMR vaccine is not recommended for pregnant women. This is what a patient might look like as they demonstrate the red spots characterized with rubella. Other viral rashes include fifth disease, which was named fifth disease because of the skin diseases described at the time of its discovery. It was the fifth one. Fifth disease includes human parvovirus B19, creates mild flu-like symptoms that give a patient an appearance of a slapped cheek facial rash. Roseola is human herpes virus 6 and 7, and it causes high fever body rash and can be dealt with and recovered from in 1 to 2 days. Lastly is hand and foot disease. This is caused by enterovirus. It's spread via mucus and saliva, usually in children, causes fever, sore throat, rash on the hands, feet, mouth, and tongue. Fungal diseases of the skin and nails. When talking about fungal diseases, we describe them by using the word mycosis. Mycosis is a fungal infection of the body. You can have cutaneous mycoses, which colonize the hair, nails, and outer epidermis. Dermatomycoses, which are informally known as tinnias or ringworm, are probably the most common. Tinea capitis is scalp ringworm, Tinea curtis is jock itch, Tinea pedis is athlete's foot, and Tinea urginum is ringworm of the nails. Cutaneous mycoses are caused by a genera of fungi that include Trichophyton, Microsporium, and Epidermophyton. Each can be treated using topical drugs like miconazole. This is what ringworm and athlete's foot look like. Subcutaneous mycoses are more serious than cutaneous mycoses. They penetrate the stratum corneum. They are usually caused by a fungus that inhabit the soil. Sporotrichosis is an example of a subcutaneous mycosis caused by Sporothrix. It can enter a wound and form a small ulcer. It can be treated with potassium iodide. Candidiasis is basically a yeast infection. Candida albicans is yeast. It forms pseudohyphae, making it resistant to phagocytosis as it grows either on the skin or internally. It occurs in the skin and mucous membranes, the genital urinary tract, and mouth. Thrush is the pathogenic growth of Candida in the mouth. This Candida results when antibiotics suppress competing bacteria or change occurs in the mucosal pH. Fulminating disease in the immunosuppressed is also a form of Candida infection. This is what thrush looks like and how Candida forms pseudohyphae. Scabies. Scabies are caused by Sarcoptes scabiei mites. These are literal insects that can burrow into the skin and lay their eggs. It causes inflammatory skin lesions and is transmitted via intimate contact. It's treated with permethrin. This is what scabies look like. Pelidosis or lice. Lice come in several forms. There are head lice and body lice. They feed on the blood of the host and lay their eggs or nits on the hair and attach to the shafts of the hair. Lice can be treated with topical insecticides, permethrin or pyrethrin, and they can be removed physically. Finally, we'll look at the microbial diseases of the eye. Inflammation of the eye membranes is referred to as conjunctivitis. Inflammation of the conjunctiva, also called red eye or pink eye, is one of the most common eye pathologies. It's commonly caused by Haemophilus influenzae, also caused by adenoviruses. It can be caused by pseudomonids associated with unsanitary contact lenses. Fungal keratitis. Fungal keratitis outbreak in 2005-2006 was due to contaminated contact lens solution. It was caused by Fusarium species, which is a filamentous fungus that form biofilms, and those mats of hyphae rested on contact lenses. Those hyphae were resistant to antifungal drugs and caused a large number of infections. Ophthalmia is caused by Neisseria gonorrhea. Large amounts of pus form in ophthalmia, and the cornea can even become ulcerated. If ophthalmia caused by Neisseria gonorrhea is left untreated, it can cause blindness. Neisseria gonorrhea is a sexually transmitted disease, and it can be passed from mothers to their newborn children. It's transmitted to a newborn's eyes during the passage through the birth canal. It can be prevented by treating a newborn's eyes with antibiotics. Inclusion conjunctivitis is caused by Chlamydia trachomatis. This is a bacteria that grows as an obligate intracellular parasite and it's transmitted to a newborn's eyes during passage through the birth canal. It can also spread through swimming pool water and can be treated with tetracycline. Trachoma is caused by some serotypes of Chlamydia trachomatis. It is the leading cause of blindness worldwide, transmitted via hand contact, or flies. Infection cause permanent scarring. The scars abrade the cornea and lead to blindness. This is what trachoma looks like. Other infections of the eye include keratitis and herpetic keratitis. Acanthamoeba keratitis is a form of keratitis that can be contracted from contact with contaminated water and soil. Acanthamoeba keratitis is associated with unsanitary contact lenses and causes mild inflammation followed by severe pain. It may even require a corneal transplant. This is the disease keratitis of the eye. This concludes our coverage of skin and eye diseases.